So picking up on the last video, there are two possible outcomes if your motion is accepted and voted on. So, and you can follow this on the flow chart as well. If the motion fails and there are no other motions that are accepted and voted on or passed, then the chair is just going to return to the speakers list, right? That's always what happens. Like when all else fails, the chair is just going to go back to the speakers list. But if the motion passes, right, you've motioned for a moderated caucus, a 9-minute long moderated caucus with a 45-second speaking time on the impact of the beef industry on climate change, right? What the chair is going to do is the chair is going to ask you, once the motion passes, the chair is going to ask whether you would prefer to speak first or to speak last. In the moderated caucus, in other words, there are going to be 12 speakers. Do you want to be speaker number 1? Or do you want to be speaker number 12? Do you want to set the there are advantages to both, right? If you're the speaker, the first speaker, you can try and set the tone of the debate, try and shape the way things are going. You can lay out Cameron's views on the impact of the beef industry. You could do it that way. As the last speaker, you have the final say on the topic, right? It allows you to hear what other people have to say. You know what you want to say. You can kind of summarize what they said, point out where you agree, point out where you disagree. So there are advantages to both. Here's the only thing I'd say. Don't ask to be the last speaker because you're afraid of being the first speaker, right? If you're thinking about asking to be the last speaker because you're afraid of being the first speaker, be the first speaker, right? We're always going to be challenging ourselves. But if strategically you're thinking, you know what, I want to hear what people have to say. I'm going to find out who I agree with, who I disagree with, commend people I agree with, make other suggestions. That's totally fine. Now, here's how moderated caucuses work. So let's assume for just the sake of this discussion, you asked to be the last speaker. Once the motion passes, the chair asks you, would you like to be first or last? And you say, thank you, Honorable Chair. I would like to be the last speaker. Then the chair will say, all delegates wishing to be, and these might not be the exact words, but the chair will say something like, all delegates wishing to speak, please raise your placards now. Don't raise your placard before a chair says now, right? Sometimes what delegates will do, and it's really, really irritating, everybody knows what the chair is about to say. It's a moderated caucus, it just passed. So the chair will start saying, all delegates wishing to speak, and all of a sudden people are like sticking their hands up, like their placards up. Don't do that. Be respectful of the chair. So once they say, the chair says, please raise your placards now, what some chairs will do is they'll pick a delegate, and they say, the delegate from Columbia is recognized. Columbia, in a case of a moderated caucus, you don't walk up to the front of the podium usually. You just stand up and you speak. Columbia will get up, they'll speak, right? The chair, if it's a 45-second speaking time, will give you a knock at maybe 30 seconds or 45 seconds, and then a double knock when your time is up. Again, when your time is up, be done with it. But the chair will recognize one person, they'll speak, then the chair will say, all those wishing to speak in this moderated caucus, please raise your placard now. And they'll just repeat that over and over again until they get down to the last speaker, and then the chair will recognize you. What some chairs will do is they'll call on multiple delegates just to speed things along. So what the chair will do is they'll say, all those wishing to speak, please raise your placards now. And then they'll say Colombia, Afghanistan, the United States. The co-chair or rapporteur will usually read it on the board. And then they'll let each of them get up and speak, right? And then they'll do it again and ask for more speakers. It just moves things along. So that's just the way it works. I prefer them personally recognizing multiple people just because it moves things along. Now, just in case, by the way, let's say after the 11th speaker, the chair doesn't call on you. They say, all delegates wishing to speak, please raise your placard now. That's one of the only points at which you can interrupt the proceedings. And what you would do is you would raise your placard, and really high, and you would say, point of order, point of order. Now you only want to do this if you know you're right. What a point of order allows you to do is to say that you think that procedurally something wrong happened, right? The chair will recognize you when you say point of order, and then what you should do is gently remind them that you were supposed to be the last speaker in the moderated caucus. You don't want to say like, you skipped me, right? Or anything like that. Thank you, Honorable Chair. I'm supposed to be the last speaker in this moderated caucus. And then let the chair recognize what's happened, and they'll almost always correct it. I have a question.
Don't say I was the last speaker in the moderated caucus. Say Cameroon was the last speaker in the moderated caucus.
Excellent point. I don't know if you heard that. What you would do is you would say, not I was supposed to be the last speaker. You would say, thank you, Honorable Chair. Cameroon was supposed to be the last speaker in this moderated caucus. Don't use a personal pronoun. See? The producer, he's not a Model UN student, but he's listening, he's paying attention. So that's how it goes. Then at the end of the moderated caucus, the chair will announce that ends this moderated caucus. And generally speaking, then they'll go ahead and ask, are there any points or motions on the floor? Now, sometimes what happens is if the delegates feel like the moderated caucus has been very useful, sometimes delegate will motion for an extension. So they'll say, they'll move for an extension of the previous moderated caucus. So it would be, thank you, Honorable Chair, fellow delegates, whatever country. It doesn't have to be Cameroon, but let's say it's you. Cameroon moves for an extension of the previous moderated caucus by half. What you can do is ask for an extension of the previous moderated caucus, but only by half of the current length, the length of the original caucus. So if it was a 9-minute moderated caucus, then you can motion for an extension by half. That means there'll be an additional 4 minutes and 30 seconds, right? If it was a 10-minute moderated caucus and you motion for a suspension by half, then it'll be extended for 5 minutes. Same process, and the same process will happen as before. One of the cool things about an extension, a motion to extend the previous moderated caucus, is this is one of those motions that has precedence. So it will be voted on first. Oftentimes what will happen is a delegate will just sort of say out loud, motion to extend the previous caucus, and the chair will allow that. So it will but either way, it will be voted on before anything else. Now, once a moderated caucus or extension are over, the chair is going to go back to asking if there are any points or motions on the floor. This is going to be a process that's going to repeat over and over and over again. So what I want to do now is I want to talk about the goal of a moderated caucus, and hopefully get it in this video. So one of the things that's useful about moderated caucuses is it allows you to narrow the topic to something specific. So if the topic is climate change, right, the original proposal in this example was impact of the beef industry on climate change. Or you can do the impact of climate change on international security. You might even narrow it down to proposing a 6:30 on the impact of climate change on regional stability in the Middle East, right? You can motion for a 9:45 on the impact of climate change on water scarcity in a particular region, right? You can do things that narrow down the topic, because sometimes what happens in people just talk about a wide range of things that it never really fully gets narrowed down. So this is where moderated caucus are useful. And what you want to do is you want to focus in on a topic that's going to be helpful for you in particular. Now, sometimes what will happen is delegates will propose topics for moderated caucuses that are just way too broad, right? They'll say, thank you, Honorable Chair and fellow delegates. Bolivia moves for 8:30 on the impact of climate change on the world, right? Or The United States moves for a 945 on the intersection between social justice, women's empowerment, and climate change. It's like, that's the whole topic, right? When a topic is too broad, right, what the chair should do is roll the motion dilatory. Oftentimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so, and then ideally, if it is too broad, in a very nice way, they'll give the delegate an opportunity to be more specific. Since you're going to be learning how to do it properly, I'm not worried about that with you in particular or our delegates, but be mindful that's going to happen. The other thing you should be mindful of in terms of moderated caucuses is that even when there's a specific topic identified, sometimes delegates will get up and speak and they'll get completely off topic, right? So you may have made a motion to focus on the impact of climate change, the beef industry on climate change, right? And the first person talks about the beef industry, the second person talks about cars and something else. And by the end, by the 10th or 11th speaker, they're speaking about, education in the third world or something. Now, when somebody gets off topic, what the chair should do is not interrupt somebody and say, like, delegate, please stay on topic. What the good chairs will usually do is they'll wait until the speaker is done, and they'll generally remind everybody, delegates, let me remind you that this moderated caucus is on the impact of the beef industry on climate change, and just sort of gently remind everyone. So I point this out to say, as the last thing about moderated caucuses, that is, stay on topic, right? And because it does get, like, people go far afield, sometimes when they're talking, it might not be a bad idea, because you're going to have your notebook with you, to write down the topic. Just write down the topic. Once it gets passed, don't write down every motion for every moderated caucus, because sometimes people are going to propose like 5 different moderated caucuses. Wait till one passes and then write it down. And if you're not sure what it is, raise your placard and say, Parliamentary Inquiry, can you repeat the moderated caucus, what the topic is, if you're not sure. Okay, so you can ask about it. But that's the key. So keep in mind that the main forms of communication and negotiation and discussion are going to be unmoderated caucuses and moderated caucuses. And we'll jump to the next part in the next video.